Well, let me first thank the German minister for her statement and also express our appreciation to the German government and the various ministries, as well as the German Arctic Office and the Alfred Wegener Institute for how they co-hosted with us the Arctic Circle Berlin Forum earlier this year. It was an extraordinary success, and we wanted to celebrate that with this statement as well as the video which you saw before. At that forum, and also as the German minister mentioned yesterday as well as this morning, we have got the message very clear that if we are going to preserve the Arctic and the ice and the glaciers, we need to stop climate change. And the only way to do that is a global energy transition. That's as simple as that. But the question is, as I asked His Excellency Liu from China on this stage yesterday, when he described the ambitious plans by China, will you do it? Will you do it? So I think the time for plans is over. The time for action has arrived. People can have fantastic policies, extraordinary reports and plans. But the question is, are we executing? So, in order to help us to understand where we are and whether this is real or not, we have gathered here on the stage in cooperation with the Shanghai Institute of International Affairs these extraordinary gathering of distinguished people from different parts. And you had the names here on the screen and in the program, so I don't need to go into that. But I think I might start by asking the co-organizers of this, the Vice President of the Shanghai Institute for International Studies, Jian, to perhaps follow me, and then I think we will just go along here, hand over to His Excellency Liu, and then Sanna, and then Jian, and then end with Adnan, and then take questions from the hall. And try to keep these statements short. Please, Jian.
I see stand for stadium.
Well, no, I prefer you sit because you want to stand in the rostrum, but the plan was to have a dialogue here, sitting, not to make speeches from the rostrum, but okay.
Your Excellency, it's our great honor to co-organize this plenary session on climate change and energy transition. Arctic Circle Assembly provides an encouraging platform for our global dialogue and discourse about the Arctic and the global governance on the climate change. In this platform, we, as an Asia scholar, we engage the communication with our Arctic partner in Nordic countries and the United States and Russia. And the dialogue for me, and I have participated, my colleague participated for almost all the assembly for the last 10 years. I have coined a terminology about such kind of dialogue. It's a dialogue between Arctic Circle and the dense populated circle. That's China, according to the IPCC report, the Arctic temperature rising more than 3 times than the average of the whole planet. The ice melting and future might be the sea level rising. But the other composition is that the main cause of the climate change is the human beings' activity of the production and consumption. So now China has undergone successfully the energy transition and the environment protection. As you know, it's a painful process, but it's a successful story. If China can make a successful transition with 1.4 billion people, and India will have their own success story about that. You know, China take the advantage of the democratic dividends decline that make this opportunity to change our society as a green energy society. You know, it's painful that according to Oran, he wrote in his book that with the goal-based governance, someone have to break the past dependence about protection. China, we have such kind of dialogue between Arctic Circle country and dense populated circle. For the last 3 years, as a scholar, we are witness the governance, global governance. We worry about the future with our counterparts from Western country and other part of the country. And we focus on our attention is focused on two ends. One end is about the leadership of the global governance addressing climate change. That especially big country cooperation that since the end of last year, last November, when President Xi met Biden in California, they talk about a lot of things. There are many issues they are not disagree. But likely, they issue a joint statement calling us Sunny Land Statement on Enhancing Cooperation to Address Climate Change. I think it's joint statement. It's not separate statement. It's a positive signal to the world, a strong support to COP28. In May, President Xi met Macron in Europe. And also, a joint statement about China-France on enhancing cooperation on the biodiversity and ocean governance from Kunming, Montreal to Nice. The other end I pay attention to is the business community. Energy business community and the ocean business community. In COP28, that's one of the consensus is that double effort to speed up the energy transition and upgrade the efficiency of energy consumption. So we have to pay close attention to the industry, different sector of industry. That's walking the talk or not. Let's pay attention to their ESG step on the concrete transition part and the standard adopted. So I think in future, the world international society also should have encourage the multi-channel supply of new energy technology. I think not some part from United States, some part from the provision from European countries, some from Japan, Korea, and also some from the new economy like China, India, and other countries. And the low price and the high quality and massive production provision that make the need of the addressing the climate change crisis. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for this opening statement. And if I may, for the purpose of the discussion, I know most of you would have probably prepared some opening comments, but I will try to pinpoint you with my questions and then open it to the floor. And as I said before, Liu, I would like to start with you following the statement. Yesterday on the stage, you described, and also at the business forum earlier yesterday morning, you described these ambitious plans of China in the energy transition. They are indeed impressive, and your track record up to now is also impressive. And you have invested more in renewable energy than all the rest of the world sort of put together. But I noticed talking to people around here, there's still the question in their mind, are you really going to do it? I asked you this question yesterday, you said yes. So can you perhaps now, having a second chance, I'm not saying you failed yesterday, please don't interpret it that way, but I think listening to people I've been speaking to yesterday and this morning, I think the question in everybody's mind here, when we are talking about accelerating the global energy transition, and China is a big part of that, not just within China, but also in relations to other countries. Can you give us a sense of how you are going to do it? How you're going to do it? Yeah. Preferably we can sit and talk here. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't know the mic works or not.
This one.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Grímsson. I think, dear friends, actually, to your question just to me, but I think I want to address the question to all the parties, yeah, to the UNFCCC. That be, this year marks the 30th anniversary of the UNFCCC. But to be honest, or to be frank, that be due to the differences among the parties, there'd be the cooperation among the parties to the UNFCCC was not so good in the first 15 years or 20 years. That's why the global action somewhat delayed. Only when the Paris Agreement was reached, I think kind of a consensus was consolidated, integrated. That's why Paris Agreement started the global process under the principle of common but differential responsibilities between developed and developing countries. But real action started since last year at COP28, when all the parties agreed after the first global stocktake of the Paris Agreement that be agreed the world needs to transition away from fossil fuels in a just, orderly, equitable manner. This is the first time in 30 years that the parties to the UNFCCC, to the Paris Agreement, touched upon the issue for energy transition. And this is a real issue we need to do. Actually, to be frank, some of the OECD countries, including some European countries, they achieved carbon peak in 1990, some in the 1990s. But they haven't started their carbon neutrality process only. They started the carbon neutrality process only since the last few years. That's why globally the process global process delayed. For China, we are a big country with 1.44 billion people. I think we are still a developing country. We are still in the process of achieving our industrialization. But we're learning from the experience and the lessons of the developed country parties. My government started to focusing on innovation, development, and deployment of the new technology ever since a decade ago. That's why I think it'll be now, after more than a decade of investment and hard efforts by our companies, our scientists, that we have been able to deploy our larger scale, renewable energy in larger scale. So we had developed our renewable energy for both hydropower, nuclear power, solar, and wind. Our objective to build up a renewable energy system dominated by the renewable energy. but that will take a few decades. And for objective will be we are going to achieve our carbon neutral before 2060. Before 2060. So, of course, you know, for any country, its energy system has been built on its energy endowment. Gulf countries have oil. United States has rich in gas, and they are the largest producer of gas and oil now. China has been endowed with coal. So our traditional energy system is coal. And we have to supply with our people, not the economy, but our people with secured energy. That's how it would be. Our coal consumption increased over the past 40 years or 50 years. But we realized that if we want to achieve carbon neutral, carbon peaking carbon neutral, we have to substitute the coal consumption by renewable energy. I think that no any other country, even among the OECD countries, they have no such efforts. Of course, I noticed Nordic countries have been doing very well, much better than the rest of the OECD countries. So China will achieve its carbon peaking before 2030 and achieve its carbon neutrality before 2060. We are confident we are going to achieve. Second, to achieve the global carbon neutral, it will not rely on just a few countries. Even people talking about the G20, if we can lead, global will achieve the carbon neutral. No, we need the global cooperation. All countries must be in this global process for achieving global neutral. That's why in Brussels, I raised the issue to our EU colleagues that if you are advocating global neutrality around 2050, you, the developed country parties, must achieve carbon neutral before 2040. Now, Chairman Grímsson, we're glad to see that only your country announced that. Iceland will achieve carbon neutral before 2040. But most of the OECD countries, they announced their carbon neutral target year by 2050. Germany announced for 2045. I complained to our European Union colleagues, if you're insisting on your carbon neutral target year for 2050, how globally we can achieve? Because under the convention, under the Paris Agreement, and even honestly say, even technologically and financially, you should lead. You should take this lead. How we developing countries could contribute. So I think the global neutral around the middle of the century is average. It's average target. So all these developed country parties must take lead. They must take lead to achieve carbon neutral before 2040, or even earlier. Oh. Then we are going to follow. Oh. I can assure you, China will achieve our carbon neutral before 2060. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. In the interest of time, we all see the clock ticking here in front of us. And before we come to Adnan, who's had the responsibility and first to lead IRENA and then COP28 as the CEO, I want to invite Sanna and then Oran to put your perspective, both from the Arctic point of view and from the other point of view. And if you can do it from your seats, I would prefer that to try to summarize it. Sanna, yes.
Yeah, well, I have followed China's climate politics for almost 20 years, and there has been really dramatic change in China's attitude towards international climate negotiations, so it's a positive change, I mean. But it's still, of course, clear that China's nationally determined contribution to UN Climate Convention is highly insufficient to meet Paris Agreement's goal, but the same critique, of course, applies to all the other countries in the world, or most of the countries at least, and it's clear that we need really radical increase in the level of ambition of all states' climate politics, otherwise the future of the Arctic looks very much melted. And I'm, of course, very much aware of the the growing regional security impacts of China's Arctic involvement, but I would still like to emphasize that we need to cooperate with China because, as we just heard, it's impossible to solve or prevent the dangerous climate change from happening without cooperation with China, given its status as the world's biggest carbon emitter. There has been positive signs that China could peak the emissions growth earlier that announced. Some even say that it may have happened last year. Some say it may happen next year. We don't, of course, know. But what is more important is that China will achieve the carbon neutrality as early as possible, because that's for the globe, it's the most important issue. As we know, China has not joined the Western sanctions against Russia, and the security landscape has changed a lot in the Arctic, but I still find this idea of new Cold War very dangerous and possibly self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think all this talk about, I mean, of course, traditional security issues are important, but I think if we only focus on them, I think it's very difficult to focus on or keep the focus on climate politics and climate change cooperation. And climate change still seems to be one of the rare sections of international politics where United States and China has a shared interests and prospects for collaboration. So I really hope that China and the United States will continue to shoulder great power responsibility for climate change despite all these tensions. Because if they don't do that, if they don't shoulder or take this great power leadership in international climate politics, it seems very difficult to see a real breakthrough to happen in international climate negotiation. And this Sino-American dialogue is, of course, very important also for the maintaining international peace and security in broader terms. So it's really important that this collaboration continues also after the presidential election in the United States in a few weeks. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. Oran, you are to some extent a veteran of these debates. I always remember when I was coming to my first Arctic conferences more than 20, 25 years ago, you were the leader in this. And sometimes a lonely voice. And now coming from California, you want to share your perspective on this.
Well, thank you very much. And I'd like to pick up on President Grímsson's initial statement that it's time to move from words to action. We need action. And so in thinking about this session, I asked myself, are there specific areas where China has interests, expertise, and experience relevant to climate change and particularly significant with respect to the Arctic? And I came up with 3 areas, 2 having to do with what we think of as mitigation, and 1 having to do with what we think of as adaptation. And here's what I came up with. Number 1, promoting alternative propulsion systems for commercial ships. We all know that commercial ships tend to burn heavy fuel oil, which is highly polluting and which is particularly dangerous in the Arctic because of black carbon. China is a leader in commercial shipping. China is a leader in technological development for marine applications. And so we need to be thinking about the development and bringing on stream of alternatives to fossil fuels for commercial ships, hydrogen, ammonia, batteries. And the Arctic application of this is obvious as commercial shipping becomes more important in the Northern Sea route. We need ships with different kinds of propulsion systems. Second point, reducing methane emissions from natural gas operations. Yes, it would be nice if we moved to alternative fuels, but for the foreseeable future, we will have very substantial use of natural gas. Natural gas emissions related to the production, liquefaction, transportation of natural gas is a serious problem when it comes to climate change. China is a large-scale importer and user of natural gas, and there are a lot of it comes from the Arctic, either by ships or by pipelines. There are a number of areas needing attention. How can we reduce emissions leakage associated with production? How can we reduce leakage associated with liquefaction? How can we build better tankers? The Arctic application of this is very obvious. For the foreseeable future, a major source of natural gas will be from the Russian Arctic. China can play a significant role concretely in helping to reduce emissions from methane operations and move us toward progress with respect to the global methane pledge. Third, finally, developing new construction methods for infrastructure in areas affected by permafrost. It turns out, some people will be surprised to know, that China, although it's not an Arctic country, has large areas of permafrost, both in the northwest and in the northeast. And so we need, now as a matter of adaptation rather than just mitigation, because climate change is coming, new technologies for infrastructure, for municipalities, for transportation systems located in permafrost-rich areas. And so China has an incentive, an experience, an interest to become a leader in the development of new technologies for infrastructure built in areas which are rich in permafrost. The Arctic applications of this are quite obvious, not only in Russia, which has a lot of permafrost, but in Alaska and in Canada as well. So here are three areas where I think we could move from words to practice, where China, with its interests and expertise and experience, could take the lead in doing concrete steps that would be helpful from the point of view of both mitigation and adaptation with respect to the climate change problems. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Adnan. I know you were last and we are getting this message here on the screen. We should allow some time for questions. But when you started, 13, 14 years ago, was the Director General of the new institution, IRENA, for international cooperation on renewable energy. Most people thought that what is here in the title of this session, the global energy transition, was a fanciful idea, pipe dream. When you left the Director Generalship 10 years later, your message was not only is it a reality and possibility, it's already happening. And then last year, you led the world together with Sultan Al-Jaber to a successful outcome of COP28. So my question to you here is, in a short way, can you convince all of us here that this needed global energy transition is indeed possible? And why? And is it already happening?
Thank you, Ólafur. And let me say, you know, I've been in the international field for a long time and following the climate negotiations. And if there's a diplomatic equivalent to a bare-knuckle fight, those are climate negotiations. What many of you will not have done is sit in those negotiating rooms and seen the different positions and ploys and what's behind those positions of the different countries. And it's been very, very difficult to come to any sort of agreement. COP28, you know, Ambassador Liu mentioned, after the Paris Agreement, the first global stocktake of the Paris Agreement, which is how we're going to keep us on a 1.5 trajectory, happened at COP28 in the United Arab Emirates. There had been 28 COPs before that. There had been all kinds of people, making all kinds of speeches about fossil fuels, but the words fossil fuel had never appeared in any decision text of any COP until COP28. As we were preparing for COP28, we came under a lot of attacks from pious European commentators, from NGOs, that an oil economy was going to undermine the COP. We had a decision that created an outcome to the global stocktake that has perhaps the most impactful decision certainly since Paris, but in the entire COP process, because we came with specific metrics. For the first time, that agreement said, the world agrees. And this is not easy to do with Saudi Arabia and Russia and others in the room. The world agrees that we need to transition away from fossil fuels. First time ever in a COP decision. And I think that in itself was incredibly significant. Now, the overall outcome included all the elements of adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage, and so on. And we had very good decisions establishing the loss and damage fund, capitalizing it to about 800 million on the first day of the COP. But the famous paragraph 28 of the GST outcome, and those of you interested in the energy transition should have a look at that, started with the intention to transition away from fossil fuels, and then had a number of measures that we needed to act on if we were to be able to keep the North Star of 1.5 within reach by the end of the decade. That's not a long time. We had an agreement to triple renewable energy capacity worldwide by 2030, double the rate of energy efficiency by 2030. Now, these are serious decisions, so there were a lot of countries that were in difficult positions agreeing to those targets, but in the course of that 2 weeks, we managed to force through that agreement. I just saw the latest IEA report looking at the COP targets, which said that if we achieve the renewable and efficiency target, 2/3 of emission reductions we need 43% emission reductions by 2030. 2/3 of those emission reductions were achievable. And the rest in a number of other fields. The professor mentioned methane. Methane is critical. By the way, we're always giving advice to China. The United States has thousands of uncapped wells that are spewing methane in the Permian and Bakken fields. What are we going to do about that? What are we going to do about decarbonizing and pushing the oil and gas industry towards decarbonization? And then, as an oil and gas producer, the UAE took that as its mission to create a global decarbonization alliance of some of the leading oil and gas companies to agree to methane emission and general CO2 emission targets related to their operations. That begins to bend the curve. It's not perfect, but the emission reductions from any source right now are critical. That was achieved. Of course, the large US companies like Chevron and Exxon are not part of that yet, but many other European and other national oil companies took part in that. So if we are able to move this, our central message in the outcome of COP28 was we need to stop looking at climate policy as a punitive policy for the economy, and we need to start looking at it in terms of this is the pathway to investments and capital allocation that will generate income, growth, and prosperity for our populations in the future. The mindset needs to change. Until that mindset changes, we will continue to have conflictual relationships in policy, and we will not be able to make the change that we need. And I think that message got through. We created a $30 billion mechanism called Altera that is going to invest primarily in the Global South, in decarbonization, and the Global South, where energy demand is growing, and the choice between conventional energy and renewable energy is going to be made, is where the application of capital can make the biggest difference. And we're committed to that. We already committed $4.5 billion to Africa energy transition. 3 billion of that is already under execution in renewable energy projects, and we're looking at allocating the rest of it to enabling infrastructure like grids. Things are happening. Growth is happening, and I think countries have begun to understand that if in this period of constrained growth, where we have stagnation in incomes, we have unemployment, that we need new poles of growth. And those new poles of growth have to be in the technologies of the future that are low carbon or zero carbon. And I think that momentum has started, and this is the opportunity for us today that we have to turn into a reality, because this is the only way we are going to achieve these targets, not by pointing fingers at each other across the table and saying, you know, I mean, if we wanted to, I mean, we always give China advice. If we wanted to say, if you look at the carbon space, who has taken the majority of the carbon space? It's the developed countries of the North. You have 1 billion people in China. To lift 700 million people out of poverty in 30 years, a historically unprecedented feat, required energy. So are we saying that you shouldn't use energy and you should remain in poverty? Or do we now look at opportunities for how we can make that energy the lowest carbon possible? And you know, I worked on energy policy in China. My agency at that time contributed to the 14th five-year plan. We made projections that China could go much faster than what its plan was indicating. And we had a workshop in Beijing about that. And I learned one interesting thing about China, is that they will, what they promise, they will deliver. Many countries have promised many things under climate, but have not delivered. What they promise, they will deliver, and they always under-promise, and the historical record shows that they always over-deliver. And this is what we're hoping will happen in the next phase of this growth. There are a lot of energy think tanks that are now positing that China, with its huge renewables investments, its investment in EVs, biggest market for EVs today, decarbonizing mobility, that will be perhaps, if that trajectory continues and accelerates, will be our biggest hope for carbon emission reductions that will begin to fill the remaining, 30% of what we need in terms of emissions reductions. And if we allow the fast-growing developing countries of the world, who nobody can say to them, do not use your energy resources and lift your people out of poverty, they will never listen to that, is how do we provide them with the capital and the technology to go a new route? And, in the investments that we've seen in renewables that have reduced the cost of solar and wind have enabled this new reality to happen, but new investment is needed. So it's about investment, it's about capital allocation, it's about getting practical about what these solutions are, and I think it is achievable that we can reach 1.5. Thank you.
Well, on that optimistic note, but especially because we are getting the message here from the control room that not only have we used up all our time, but we have also used up additional minutes from the other time. Mm-hmm. So, unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but the message is here, and after this is over, we will listen to the speech by one of the established OECD countries, Britain and United Kingdom. But I think, Adnan, to put it simply, you seem to be, despite everything, very optimistic that the energy transition globally is achievable. And if we want to preserve the Arctic, that is absolute condition going on. Without the comprehensive energy solution, we are not going to save the Arctic. But you seem to be saying that it will happen, and you're optimistic because now it has become good business. And if everybody, every country, every part of the economy realizes that this energy transition is basically a good business, makes a lot of economic sense, then we might perhaps be saved. So that's where I will leave it. We have had on the stage now in these 24 hours representatives from 3 of the largest economies in the world by the end of this decade, China, US, and India. And if they combine to lead the world and the rest will follow, yes, we can do it. We can do it. So we will see whether that optimism is a reality. But it's been a great privilege for me and for all of you here to have these people with their combined experience and wisdom sharing their reflections on a comprehensive global energy transition. Thank you very much, and I invite the British representative to come to the stage. Thank you.